Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look at Audio Architect by Harman, which is their control software. Over 10 years old now, came out in 2013. So I'm going to give an overview of it. It's still in use today after all these years. It still has its uses. So I'm going to go through it with an overview, showing you what it's good for. So, Audio Architect is by Harman, which is actually a Samsung company now, after all these years. And it's used basically as a network control for loads of different Harman sort of products. So the kind of main ones being sort of JBL, BSS, Soundweb London, Crown amplifiers, things like that. There are a few other sort of different products like AKG and DBX and stuff. And I know there's a few other sort of outliers you can control. So let's get into it. So when you boot it up, this is pretty much what pops up. Ask for a network connection. This is more if you know you have a specific network port that you go down. So especially on like you've got an installed rack computer and you've got multiple networks, especially if you've got a general network computer that does all your playback and different stuff, you can actually select a single network port that will do all this. So for now, I am not bothering because, well, I don't have anything, have any products here, so it's kind of pointless. And of course, you get your this all comes up straight away as well, the kind of application options, and then you can basically go through this with all the different how to set it up. Generally, it's as it is. You don't really have to kind of change it or anything. You can, especially autosave is one of those things you probably want to enable, just to kind of make it easier in the long run, so you don't forget to save it. Because I know I'm bad at that sometimes. You just do all this work and then something crashes and then you lose it all and you're like, crap. Is what it is. And then, of course, you've also got stuff like load previous venue file and startup. The same as other software that happens with. Windows settings, how it displays. The custom panel controller or designer. That's the basically working design for iPads, so you can control the system. So you don't actually need like a specific laptop or anything like that. You can actually control it from an iPad, which is actually very, very useful. It's actually a really good kind of piece of kit once it's set up. If it's as long as it's set up correctly. If you set it up incorrectly, it can be an absolute pain in the ass. What have we got? Okay, feature updater. I'm not going to bother with. It's just got more updates. Then you've got the HiQNet address, which is definitely to do with the network settings and finding all your devices. And then if you discover anything, you can actually add them, or you can do it manually. It's completely up to you. The do not show discovered devices pop-up window, you can change that as well. And then, of course, you've got meter subscription rate. I generally just kind of leave that as is. Network connectivity, of course, that's back where adding a different Ethernet ports. You can also add static addresses for specific networks and VPNs and stuff. Not VPNs. Okay, so you got the proxies and static routes. So you can actually have separate networks specifically for control, and especially if you've got specific servers. And this is more large scale operations where you've got like a big office building or a big venue and you've got multiple rooms where you want to kind of divide areas into different sort of their own sort of networks. Safety network. This one is quite an important one. This is when you're kind of uploading to the actual devices, but generally always best to keep it on prompt. Okay, into the actual software. So starting up in the top left, you've got define venue, which basically this is where you design your rooms. So at the moment, it just defaults to room 1, which you can kind of change the size of. And then you can add extra rooms. And of course, it will just add on normally. You can add corridors and bits and pieces. And then you can change the shape and stuff like that and move it along. Then you can basically build out your venue basically the way you want to. Loads of different rooms, especially if you know you're going to have multiple devices in different rooms, and then you can connect rooms together. Something like that. Something simple. That could be an office block with different or classrooms or whatever. And then I don't know why that's showing. Oh, well, I see. Well, it's done that. Okay. That's something just to bear in mind where that's like that. It's put the room name there. And then you can change these different settings and what they're called. So especially if you had a large scale hall, like so, on this one, I could then call this hall. And then this room 1 could be classroom 1, and then so on and so forth. And then you could also have, especially here, I could then actually go, oh, this is going to be the rack room where the rack's going to be. And then I can actually go into up to add devices, and then I can basically pick my room. So if I go into the rack room, I can then actually go into and add my devices from the different brands. So I can go into, that's the BSS audio, which is all the Soundwood London controllers. Let's just grab the blue 806DA. And then when this pops up, depending on the device, depends on the settings, and whether you're having analog card or digital cards. So I can actually change this out, and I can actually go, I want digital input instead. Accepting configure device. Okay, now I've got my inputs and my outputs for the 806DA. The 806DA is actually a matrix device that is Dante, and then it actually gives me up here how much processing power percentage is used and how much Dante inputs it's used. And then on this menu is basically where all your controls are on how to configure your device. So you got your dynamics, your mixers, Blue Link, which is Harman's own digital connection. So you can actually have your inputs and outputs, especially on devices that don't have Dante. They will generally have Blue Link, which is very useful, especially if you have one room that has a Dante device like this one, this 806DA, and then in another room you could have one that's not Dante, but you need to get Ethernet to the other room or audio to the other room. You can use Blue Link as a transport protocol. Of course, you got your port crossovers. There's your Dante inputs and outputs, which this unit has. Delay, your primitives, so your FIR filters, your modulators in the summer, your EQ, your matrices, so you actually got your matrix mixers on here, which are really, really handy. Tools, then you can actually see your meters, and you can actually trigger things in noise generator and tone generator. Wire tags, and then you've got your sub configuration, which is not for subwoofers. It means you can actually have a configuration on its own inside the wider configuration, especially if you want to run a specific chain of like processing for a specific input and output that you only want that to always do it. Then you can run it in between its own thing. When going back, just make sure you actually click the move one up level rather than going to rack room. And this rack room actually shows the overview and actually shows the front of the device. And then, of course, from there, you can actually go up and go back to the rooms, which then shows the devices. Nice. And then just double click into it. So you can then also, within this, you can go up here and configure the logic of it. Depending on your system, your building. So you can actually run logic potentially, especially with fire alarm systems. In venues, you can actually set it to mute the system if you want to. You create presets for the system, and then you, in the fire alarm triggers, you can actually mute and unmute the system by switching those presets. Depending on what you need, there are very much different settings. So of course, you got your source, your end, your gate, and your processing, because the wire tag and the sub configuration. This I'll go into a separate video on because this gets quite complicated depending on your needs. So I will go over different scenarios within that. And then you can configure your control ports. So this is where you can actually have those triggers from outside, especially like the fire alarm system, like I said, to mute it and stuff. And then you've got a few other sort of different setups. You got no diagonals, self-explanatory, aligning, sort of your space, your size, your card setup again, adding a link. You can hide parameters, and then of course you can mute all, which is very useful, especially when you're testing the system, where you want to make sure you've got your full signal chain, you've got an audio path from one to another. You can actually mute all, and then you can go through and individually mute and unmute your inputs and outputs. If I come out of here, go back onto this screen, of course, I can add on more devices. So, of course, crown amplifiers, do multiple different amplifiers depending on what your need is. Of course, the amplifiers are going to depend on what speakers you are installing. Especially for larger systems, if you're going up to do JBL's sort of line arrays, you're more likely end up going to potentially use their iTech series, or potentially the DCI series. It really depends on what your system requires, sort of the budget. But you've got all the different amplifiers here. So let's grab sort of the iTech 4x3500, which is one of their digital amplifiers. So it's here, 4-channel amp. And then let's grab one of each, I think, just to show the kind of differences between the different amplifiers. So yeah, these are just their different amplifiers. It actually shows the front of them. It shows their status. So of course, at the moment they're offline. Sorry. When you actually do connect up to the network, it will auto discover it, and if it matches your design, it will just automatically go online. And then to actually control it, you'd have to actually simulate the venue and go online. You can also route audio between rooms. You can associate amplifiers. So the routing of audio is between rooms. So you can tell it, especially with Blue Link, I want to go between this room and this room, especially between different controllers. The associate amplifiers is basically just associating your amplifiers to the room and the network. You can configure your monitoring. When you go to either simulate venue or go online, you can actually match the devices. You need to go online for that rather than, and then that will actually match it to what's actually physically installed. You can go up to net setter as well, which will basically, this is where you set all your networking devices with their IDs and IP addresses and bits and pieces like that. So then it can all be set correctly within the network. Going further along, you've got your venue presets. This is where you actually set up those presets, so then you can actually switch them on triggers and bits and pieces like that. The parameters of those presets, which I'll do a specific video on. Scheduler, which is very, very useful, especially if you know if you want this to be installed and left, and you can just, especially at the beginning and the end of the day, you can get it to do different things, or during the day, and you can set this up how you want to with different bits and pieces, which is really useful. Your logic rules is where you add your logic. Access control is very self-explanatory with your different sort of user setup. Application functions, who gets access to what, the venue mode, custom panels, room panels, event filtering, EC2, and you can add different users and stuff. What else we got on here? Event log tells you everything that's kind of happened within the system. So if you've got an error or a problem and you can't quite figure out, this is the best place to go. Of course, you've got the net setter. You've got your firmware update, so you can pull any sort of firmware, new firmware for all your devices. And then, of course, you can also locate. You can also do new custom panel modes. So this is where you can actually sort out your motion control, which is the actual iPad software. And then you can also input stuff. And that's kind of the basic overview of the system. Of course, you've got templates you can add in. You can print out sort of the device networks and bits and pieces. You can export the parameters as a JSON file, which is really handy. So that's kind of the basic overview. It goes very much in depth of what you can actually do with it. And as time goes on, I'll actually go into a lot more detail on the different systems you can use with it. If I can, I will try and get a couple of devices or a system I can hook up to, so I can actually show the system actually working and online and what it actually does in real time. Otherwise, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in another video.